Welcome to Value Added, the real estate podcast where we speak with the brightest minds in the world of real estate who provide, create, and realize value in an ever-changing market. If you're a real estate professional delivering value to your clients, an investor creating value not seen by others, or a busy professional who passively invests in real estate to grow the value of their hard-earned dollar, then you're in the right place. And now your host, Nick Walters.
Hey gang, welcome to another episode of Value Added, the real estate podcast. I'm excited about today's guest. Her name is Jennifer Leahy. Jennifer is the #1 sales agent at Douglas Elliman's Greenwich, Connecticut office. Jennifer and her team, the Leahy team, over the last year, they have closed over $50 million in sales. So without further ado, let's get on with the show. Jennifer Leahy, welcome to the show. Good to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be on.
Tell the listeners a little bit about your career and how you got to where you are today.
So I run the Jennifer Leahy team at Douglas Elliman. We service Connecticut and Westchester. I started back on this side of real estate about 6 years ago for Douglas Elliman. And it's a funny story because I was going through a divorce and I had never sold residential real estate before. And I decided it was a good time to start and also to do it without an office in Connecticut. So when I started, there was no office out here, and Howard and Dottie just, I don't know, they took a chance on a crazy young thing that was like, I'm going to be successful. And they're like, go for it. So really started from, the beginning 6 years ago. I was on the mortgage side out of college. I was a mortgage banker, and then I was a broker, a top producing broker in the city. So I did know Elliman agents from back in the day, early 2000s, and did that. And then I decided to pursue sort of an altruistic path and went back to school to get my master's in special and general education. I had a nonprofit in Cambodia giving scholarships to highly impoverished children, and had a private tutoring practice, taught at Eagle Hill in Greenwich, and moved back from the city and moved to Greenwich and where I grew up, and taught at Eagle Hill, loved it, and then decided that when I was going to be on my own as a single mom, that going back into real estate would be a more lucrative career to be able to raise my children and provide for them in the way that I thought they deserved and that I wanted to live. So it's been definitely a wild ride, but I enjoyed every moment of it, even when I was working 80-hour weeks with 2 toddlers.
So let's go back to your mortgage business. That's a great entree into one of the very important components of buying real estate. Very few transactions are purchased with all cash in the grand scheme of things.
Mm-hmm.
What did you learn most about that part of the business that you were able to translate into the success that you've had today in the residential real estate market?
So much. I mean, number one, it's really important to know the finances. I think that a lot of agents haven't had that benefit, and I love that I know the intricacies of how a deal works on the finance side. I'm able to advise people, and it's not just first-time home buyers, it's all buyers, especially if they've never gotten a mortgage before, but rates are really low, just kind of breaking it down for them, how you can do financing 75% with a 10% HELOC behind, kind of, being creative with clients to figure that out, looking at FHA loans versus conventional. So being able to kind of guide my clients, and now with lending guidance being so hard, right? It's really hard for people to get a mortgage right now, looking at different options. Like, people had to pivot from a big bank like Bank of America to more of a smaller lender who will do more interesting financing for someone who doesn't have perfect credit and 20% down. So I'm seeing a lot of pivots there. So it's nice to be able to guide clients and also know the process of a mortgage once they put their application in, making sure they've paid for their appraisal to move things along quickly. And I think just having that language accessible is very helpful. Also having underwritten or having my underwriter look at co-op documentation. Although it's rare here for me to have to look through that, I still do need to understand co-op and condo documents. So that was very helpful. Obviously, I was dealing with a lot of lawyers on that side. So being able to navigate that, because it's a different language, and dealing with lawyers is different than dealing with the client side. And I was doing, I probably did 200 mortgages a year. So being able to deal with high transactions, I don't do 200 real estate transactions a year, but it definitely gave me a flavor of being able to multitask and have the proper team to be able to really elevate me and support my clientele.
Let's talk about that creative financing in your past life. Can you recall a transaction and how creative you got to structuring a transaction?
Well, I mean, back then it was like if you had a pulse and a bank account, you kind of were able to get a mortgage. I have a moral compass that's true north, so I definitely feel like I vetted my clients even when they were doing a Nino loan, which for those who don't know, that's a no income, no asset. So there's no income and no asset verification. Let's see. I think the two most interesting loans I did was for a very famous actor who literally somehow showed no money on his tax return. And I just remember calling him up and saying, let's call him Harry. I said, I'm like, Harry, you got to tell me you've got money in the mattress or something, because I don't understand how you're buying this place. And, we had a very frank conversation about where his finances were. And we're able to do the transaction because with these it's on my moral compass, right? So I'm as we saw in the mortgage crisis, obviously there was a lot of people not doing that to make sure their buyers could really perform. Another interesting one, and these were just great, a young couple, they had lived in Europe and did their masters in Europe and had worked in Europe and had no US credit. So we had to go back to their landlord from, I think it was London, get the credit history from London to present to, I think it was Bank of New York. And I remember it was a wild deal. And then all these letters to confirm that they had these credit, because they literally didn't have credit. When I say they had no credit, there were no lines of credit. And we got that deal done. That was super interesting. And then in general, like there was I used this product when I bought my apartment in Manhattan. It was like a 1 month LIBOR, where my rate never went above 1.95. So I sort of am spoiled because I knew how to use my money to work for me, right? And let the banks not take all my money. And now I feel like everyone's kind of getting that benefit, right? And there's so many interesting products now. Just to pivot to now, like there's a 10-year IO that amortizes over 30 years, but it doesn't readjust the rate. That's a sick product, especially if you work at somewhere where you're bonus driven. For the next 10 years, you pay down a loan and your mortgage readjusts. That's the benefit of an interest only. A lot of people think that, oh, my payments are so much lower. Sure, they are. I mean, that it's a little bit dangerous if that's the way you're thinking about it. Because I'm very conservative, but it's awesome to be able to pay it down and it readjusts. So if you have a big year coming up and you have a $1.5 million mortgage, but you're going to pay off $750,000, the next month you're paying a $750,000 mortgage. Where right now I'm actually, interestingly enough, because I bought a foreclosure, I'm in this 30-year fixed product, which I've never been in before. And, I don't have that benefit. And it sort of bothers me. So I'm going to refinance into something that's more fun. But yeah, so those, they're done some really wild products, but it's been, it's wild. And, home equity lines of credit are really tough now. None of the big banks are doing them. So I've done major home equity lines of credit before on big transactions. I think I did one for, I think it was, it sounds crazy, but I think I did $1 million home equity line of credit on like this $4 million purchase behind, it's like a $1.5 million first loan. It was some crazy thing. So, back in the day, it was wild, totally wild.
Different landscape these days, huh?
Yeah. And it's good. I mean, as it should be. It concerns me a little bit that the smaller banks maybe be doing things that will hurt them in the end, but I hope that the underwriting now, we've learned from our past mistakes, although our memories seem to be short as humans, that we're doing things smart. I know the big banks are. The big banks aren't taking any chances. And, I think there's something as an American citizen we should appreciate, that's responsible choice, where this choices maybe weren't responsible before. It's, it's interesting.
Let's segue from one wild time to another wild time that we're experiencing right now. We're deep in the weeds. Coronavirus, most of my brokerage business is down in Manhattan. That's taken a much different turn than what you're experiencing up in Fairfield County. I want to ask you, do you remember the exact moment a few months ago where you thought to yourself, wow, this is a completely different market from yesterday? Do you remember that day or that moment?
So the moment came before the moment that I have such a clear memory. We started getting a lot of rental calls, like panicked rental calls, so many so that every single person on my team was overwhelmed. We did more rentals already than I've done in the past 6 years combined, and big numbers. I'm not talking about like $5,000. I'm talking about $20,000, $15,000, $50,000, big numbers. But there was a moment I had a client come out from the city, and we couldn't, like, I had to be far away from them. They didn't want to like really even interact, right? We would interact after over FaceTime, and seeing them in masks and this sense of urgency, and literally it was like the can open and it just exploded. And I remember from that moment, I'm showing them at like 8 p.m., right? I mean, like all day, they're like, I gotta buy something today, which words I've never heard before in my market out in Fairfield County. And there was a sense of urgency when I drove home that night, and I remember it was like sunset and I'm getting on 95 and going, the tides have shifted. And I was like, I'm no longer going to be sleeping. And truly, that was sometime in April. And I don't know the exact date, but I have to tell you, I think I started working 12 hours, 7 days a week, nonstop. And I really haven't looked back. I made myself take off 4 days since April. And it's just been wild. And even taking off days, I'm still like fielding phone calls, right? There's no rest right now. And it's cool. I mean, I love being successful. So that's what success comes with, right? A lot of work. But yeah, and it hasn't stopped. And like I have to tell you, I thought I'd have a break, and then the riots, right? Like the looting. And it's the whole like another round of phone calls of people being like, get me out. I'm gonna get other financing, for people who didn't think they could buy at the same time as having a New York City apartment they couldn't sell. Just wild. It's really, really wild.
Let's talk about that rental inventory that you've taken off the market, because of coronavirus. Those large transactions, 20,000 a month, 50,000 a month, 15,000 a month. Were those sales listings of yours that maybe they were lagging on the market for a little while, and you advised your clients, let's put this on as a furnished short-term rental or a long-term lease? What was the mix of that inventory that was being absorbed in the rental market?
It's a great question. It's funny. I actually, only one of them was an active listing. The rest of my clients with active listings wanted to sell. Two of them were one was a client, but they're in Florida. And I was like, you guys want to rent it? I could probably get you, $40,000, $50,000 a month. And they were like, what? I was like, yeah, $40,000, $50,000 a month. And that one, I listed for 40. It went for 50 within 3 hours. The wire for $176,000 came within 2 hours after that. I mean, it was wild. And then another one was a neighbor. I'm like, yeah, I can rent your house out. And, it's like, if you think about it, for any of us who aren't in that mode and have somewhere else to go, I don't care how wealthy you are. Like, if you can make an extra $100,000 during a pandemic, you're going to think twice. You really are going to think twice. And everyone did. Everyone's like, okay, yeah, I'll pay for college with 2 months of rental income. Sure. So, yeah, it was kind of fun.
Take me through a past deal where you had to provide even more value than you normally provide to get a deal across the finish line.
Oh my gosh, there are many, because again, it was the buyer's market. Although I do 50% buyers, 50% sellers, I think the sell side, I enjoy a challenge. It was fairly early on. I had a listing in Ridgefield. And the first weekend, I have these New Yorkers that come up very familiar with the area, and they put in a very good offer, really good offer. It took me 6 months to negotiate the deal. We closed the deal with the contract at the closing table. 6 months. Wow. Yeah. And my team knows you don't let a deal die. Unless it's dead and there's not a pulse. If there's a pulse, you're going to keep trying. That was a crazy deal. 6 months. Yep. 6 months. And it was that's a lot of personality, right? But that was incredible. But it helped me because I had done what a lot of my peers, my colleagues had never done, even if they'd been in the industry for 20 years. They're like, you closed at the table with the contract? I'm like, yeah. Because I was like, you know what? If it's going to work, then I made a yes. I already have enough no's, right? I'm okay with no's. But if I get a yes, I'm going to close a $1.8 million transaction my second year in the business. I'm not going to be upset about it, right? So it was funny, fast forward a couple more years, I think it was last year-ish, I don't remember. My clients are closing on this fabulous castle. It's a castle in Riverside. And it was an interesting set of personalities, and it was all EQ and instinct, how we negotiated the deal. I was representing the buyer, and we knew that we had to be very cool to get everything we want and not be too grabby, because we wanted the house fully furnished. And, where other people that we have to write down the whole list, I said, if you want to do that, you're going to get no furniture. I promise you, you will get no furniture. If you write nothing down and you say whatever you want to leave, I'd be happy with, you're going to get a lot more. So there was, amazing antiques. We're talking like the value of some of the antiques would be more than people's homes, right? Certainly the average sales price in America. And at the end of the day, because we were so loose and we were cool, we got everything. We got everything we wanted. And that deal closed with the contract at the table. And the agent on the other side, who was, 20 years in, he said, Jen, you're crazy. I said, trust me on this. We're going to get the deal done. And it did. It's just like we had to go with the flow. Otherwise, one of the personalities would have blown up. So I think that I love being creative, and anyone, even today I'm doing a creative aspect on a deal to get the number for my seller. Being creative is so fun, right? And you're getting the deal done. I will find a yes in every situation. Like, I think that's why I was born for sales, because you could tell me no 4,000 times and I have not heard it once. Where I'm like, but you kind of seem like you may want to do that later. So I'm going to circle back on it. I don't hear no. I don't know. And it's like I was born this way. I think that's why I'm so positive. Where people see rain, I'm like, the flowers are growing. And I kind of use that for my real estate. And I also work a lot, right? So that combination seems to really help make these, those were crazy deals. Those were crazy. They were just nuts. And we're talking about probably almost $1 million worth of inventory, worth of personal belongings that we got in that transaction.
Well, let's talk a little bit about marketing and how you build your brand today versus how you built your brand 6 years ago when you first got into the resi space. How have your marketing efforts evolved over that 6-year period, and how are you really generating business these days, aside from your referral network, your personal network? How are you leveraging social media or other advertising mediums?
So I was really lucky. So I think my first year, Howard and Dottie were very gracious and had me come to the top producer lunch. And Tom Ferry was there, and it was sort of like, oh, Tom, you should meet Jen. You should meet Jen. She's gonna crush it. Blah, blah, blah. And so I met Tom, and I said, Tom, can I coach with you? And he's like, oh, sure. You call my people. I'm like, no. If I can't talk to your people, I want to talk to you. But I appreciate it. Thank you so much. What's the one piece of advice you could give me? And he said, my one piece of advice is do a Facebook Live. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What's Facebook Live? So he's like, here, Jen, it's Facebook Live on your phone. So I'm like, okay. So this is my rule, and I think everyone should follow this rule. Anyone who makes more money than you, listen. Anyone who makes more money than you, and a good person, I'm not saying, follow people who are not good. Do what they're doing. Anyone who makes more money than you, if you can't do what they're doing, try to copy it as close as possible. So if Tom Ferry, who's way more successful than me, is doing this, I'm like, I gotta do it. So I walk out of the room, and in my first Facebook Live, and there's people who remember it, was like, hey, it's Jen, I'm at sign with Elliman and saying hi. I don't know what I said. I had been in the business, no joke, for 60 days. Okay. So, but here I am, my rule is, that's been my rule my whole life. You're more successful, you're a good person. I'm going to copy you and I'm going to do it and I'm going to fake it until I make it. And it's great. And hopefully I'll do it better than you and you'll be proud. So I just never stopped. And so I was doing videos when no one else was doing them. And other agents would say, oh, I can't do it. I don't know how to do it. Da, da, da. And I say, do you like to make money? Yeah, I like to make money. Of course I do. Then stop looking in the mirror and do a video. Because last year I closed about $50 million worth of business. I would say 25 million, half of my business came from my social media referrals. That's a big number. I mean, again, if you like to make money and other people, and Frederick, I'm very fortunate, Frederick represented a dear family friend and sort of met him at the beginning of his $1 million listing career. And I would follow him, right? Like, who didn't? And I was like, oh, Frederick's doing all these videos, like, and he's posting all the time. So I just followed him. I'm like, he's paying someone probably $100 grand a year. I don't even make $100,000 yet. I better follow what he's doing because I don't have $100,000 to pay someone. And so I just totally mimicked him. And then when I listen to like Gary Vee, which I'm sure a lot of people do and don't take his advice, well, I do. If Gary Vee tells me go on TikTok, now listen, my TikTok game is not very good, but my LinkedIn game is not so bad. And I'm getting better. And LinkedIn is another great platform for, titans of industry that don't have time for Facebook. They don't have time for Instagram, as they shouldn't, because they're running the world. And I appreciate that and I respect their time. So I'm going to post on LinkedIn. I'm not nailing it yet, but I'm going to. I promise you that by the end of this year, I will have made it to my nailing it. But I'd be the first one to tell everyone else, go on LinkedIn, post as much as possible. Important content that's interesting, not like, your Instagram stories. So it's evolved in the sense it's gotten more professional. Right now I can pay people to help me. I am not on social media all day. I oftentimes have approved a post, but I'm not doing it, right? So that's evolved. There's a professionalism that comes with it. That's which I appreciate. But I mean, I was probably dedicating 6 hours a day to social media for the first 2 years of my career, analyzing the data. Now I have someone that does that for me, although I still am always on the pulse, right? Like I'm going to pivot to LinkedIn and my social media person may be young and not understand the benefit, but I'm going to see if I'm making money from something, oh, you betcha I'm going to figure out why and how to make it better. So that's sort of the pivots on how I, leverage that platform. I think social media is single-handedly the least expensive way to crush it in life. It's like, how do you take away zeros? I listened to, I forget who it was, some billionaire. He's like, if you can take away a zero to add a zero, do that all day long. So I remember it was like an efficiency. I was going through my business and looking at efficiencies, and it was probably 3 years ago. And I said, where are my zeros? How do I take away more zeros? And where do I add a zero to make more zeros? Because it's okay to invest. You should invest in yourself and your business and your health and wellness, but only if it's going to pay back, right? Like, am I going to buy a SoulCycle bike for ridiculous amount of money, $2,500 that I just spent? You betcha, because I'm going to get back $5,000 worth of wellness points. Whatever it is, like I know that's going to, it's going to offset. So I definitely do. I look at efficiency a lot because, the only thing we can't get back in life is time. So I better spend my time wisely. And I work really hard. So anyone who's like, oh, you're so successful, it's like, yeah, because I work really hard. And every dollar I have and I spend on my children and our life is money I spent. I worked really hard for it. So I really pay attention. So I think that's how it's evolved. In the beginning, I wasn't, because I was so confused, right? It's all so overwhelming, but now I'm not confused.
Those are all fantastic points. We're going to finish off this segment, or this episode rather, with the hard-hitting questions. These are the questions that we ask every one of our guests. The first question I always like to start off with is, what is your why?
My kids. My kids are my why.
That's all you got to say? It's that easy, right?
Yep. Yep.
Besides your alarm clock, what gets you out of bed every morning?
I don't have an alarm clock. I have an adorable 9-year-old who is a morning early bird. And he's like, Mommy, time for huggies. And Lord knows, I mean, I am not a morning person, but that child at 6 o'clock in the morning comes into my bedroom to give me huggies. And I get up and I meditate and I start my day. It's a little bit off with Corona, right? We all are waking up a little bit later. It's a little bizarre, but yeah, he's my alarm clock. So
What is one book that you've recently read that has significantly impacted your life or your career?
Great question. So I love to read, and my team knows that because I buy everybody books probably too often in their heads, but Never Split the Difference. I have to tell you, I could read that book 100 times. It's awesome. And everything on that, you know what? And you lead with that kind of, if you lead life with a structure in that book, right, which is pretty positive. If you look at the way you're really negotiating, right, you're seeing the yes, you're getting to yes, you're seeing the yes, and you're pivoting to the yes. And that just changed. It changed my business coach also helped me, but that combination of pivoting very difficult clients to be putty was so cool that that book definitely influenced me in a major way in my business.
Great book. Chris Voss is the author of that, I believe. I read that several months ago. I'll make sure to add that to the show notes. Next, how do you like to pay it forward?
Oh, great question. So I think paying it forward is more important than getting paid. I'm on the board of the David Lynch Foundation. I support my local Transcendental Meditation Center. I support local domestic violence counseling center. During these tough times, I supported my local community fund. When I'm asked to support in specific ways, there's usually not a time I'm not going to say yes. If someone said to me, hey, Jen, we need a lot of rice, like it's tough times, like can you get me rice, can you get bread, peanut butter, like during that, I'm like 100%. Let me order it on Amazon, like whatever I can do, Instacart, however I can help. And I think my kids as well. And that's not only in that way, but like tomorrow we've organized like a Love Burst Racism rock painting in the neighborhood. So we're going to paint little rocks about bursting racism with love and put them around town and drop them off at neighbors' houses. I think all of those efforts are important, and they all, for me, and I'm hoping my kids will learn this, just have to be super like into my heart. Like I don't show up at and everyone knows this who knows me. I do not show up at events, any event that's not something that pulls my heartstrings. Right? We all get invited to 6,000 events. I don't need to look pretty somewhere. I don't. Like I am pretty. I'm good. But I do need to show up to people who need me and causes that are important to me. There are many causes that every cause is important to someone, and I love that. But I definitely have picked my lanes, and I think that it's nice for me to just be able to dive deep in them.
What advice would you give your 21-year-old postgraduate self?
Never stop exploring. I don't think I'll ever stop exploring. Like never stop questioning. Right? Like have I have a wandering spirit to begin with, but always I'm a seeker. Like keep it up. Don't stop seeking. Don't stop putting yourself in uncomfortable positions. Ask yourself hard questions. Ask the people you love that are around you hard questions. I think I did that, but I think if someone had told me to do that even more, maybe I would have even been more robust in my search. But I was born a seeker, so I think I would continue. I think that I would give that advice to my 21-year-old self still, and actually every 21-year-old. Like, don't be so busy to get to some destination that doesn't exist, right? Like, the joy is in the wandering. Like, It's not about getting to the waterfall. It's like along the way, all the things that you see.
How can our listeners learn a little bit more about you or contact you?
They can contact me via email or my cell phone. My email is jennifer.leahy@elliman.com. My cell phone is 917-699-2783. I'm always happy to talk, whether it's a broker or a buyer or seller. And especially a lot of agents reach out to me for help. And obviously my website, thejenniferleahyteam.elliman.com.
Jennifer Leahy, that's a wrap. Thanks so much for adding your value today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to leave a rating and a review, which will help us introduce the podcast to other listeners. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, which will give you access to other episodes you may have missed. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you next week.